history of Bubba after Bubba after Bubba after Bubba, and a lot of these names, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to keep track of who's following who, because it's Seleucus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's Ptolemy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and every once in a while they give themselves another name, to try and stand out from Pappy or Grandpappy. But the difficulty in this passage is, sometimes when you're reading it, it's kind of like reading through the genealogies. And our mind wants to race ahead. In our mind, we process information faster than people can speak, and even faster than we can read it on the page. And so our mind wants to jump ahead constantly, but and after a while you start to yawn and think, what's the point? But I trust that tonight you'll see, as he goes through this, we'll mention a couple of things that have already been revealed to Daniel. But now Gabriel is going back and he is showing Daniel this really in-depth breaking down of the dream that he revealed to him in I believe it was chapter 8. As he goes through here, keep in mind that the theme of Daniel is that God is in control. And you keep having these folks who, rise up in the place of their dad, and they do something, and then this guy whoops on this guy, and this guy whoops on this guy, and we're going to see that over and over and over again tonight. But the whole time, God is using these men against each other to bring about a circumstance and a situation. And remember, there were two big events that happened in history that God was revealing to Daniel, and he said, you need to be aware of this guy who is really going to wreak havoc on Israel. And we're almost there. We won't get there tonight, but tonight are the last few things that's set in place for Antiochus Epiphanes. And he hates the Jews, and he persecutes them like nothing else. Now, between Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist, we know that there are a lot of people who hate the Jews and persecute them. You look at it and you say, why isn't Hitler in here? I mean, my goodness, he rounded up millions of them and gassed them. And in dreams, Daniel is warned that all of this human history is happening, and this is what's going to come. It's not just the Jews. It's going to set the stage to bring us all the way to Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a horrible dude, to say the least. Let's read our passage, and then we'll bow for a word of prayer, starting in verse 10 tonight. And one shall certainly come and shall be more than 5 to but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, come certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the forest of the land, but he shall stumble and fall, and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. That's where we'll end tonight, because verse 21 is going to be the entrance of Antiochus, or Antic. A couple of different ways of saying the dude's name, Epiphanes. Let's bow for a word of prayer. We'll dig into our passage tonight. Father, sometimes you read all this and it sounds like it has no meaning, and you wonder, what's the point? What's it supposed to mean to me? What benefit is it? But one of the things we have to remember when we dig into this passage is you are using Gabriel to explain to Daniel how all of these things are going to unfold and how you work in the affairs of men to bring about certain things. The man that we're going to look at next Sunday night is an evil, evil, wicked person who hated your people. And it's going to happen again with the Antichrist. And even though these horrible times come and you wonder, where is the justice? Where's the judgment? They are doing, by your design, pray tonight that we would be amazed at the detail with which you shared with Daniel long before it ever happened. And help us. That are happening in the world don't exist. There's only Syria and Egypt, and they hack and whack at each other. One of them gains power, then the other gets mad, and he comes back, and he gains power, and then the other one gets mad, and he comes back, and they constantly, for years, it's like 150 years, go back. And you have some sons who are weak, and you have some sons who are strong, and you have strong leadership, and you have 10, his sons are stirred up. Now you remember Ptolemy down in Egypt has given Syria a hind-end whooping. I mean, they put a whooping on them. Part of their kingdom, their dad was, and he kind of ran away, didn't even really put up too much of a battle. And so it says here, the sons shall be stirred up. And you have to wonder, oh, wait a minute. If Ptolemy was so smart, and he conquers all this land, why didn't he just go and kill the Seleucid family? I mean, just wipe them out. Then who's going to take the throne? I mean, once and for all, why doesn't he end this thing? I'll tell you why. Because God wouldn't let him. Fourth day. Seleucid, yeah, that guy, the third. Selibuddy the third. I can't hardly say their names tonight. He prepares to attack Egypt. He only ruled for a short time and then he is killed. And that's one of the things that amazes me about this passage. Because if you look at verse 10, it says, but his sons, plural, shall be here, and his brother are working together, and they are raising an army, and they are making plans together, and the two of them are going to go and accomplish this thing. But Selly baby here gets wiped out, and so his brother Antiochus III, who's going to give himself the name Antiochus the Great here, he takes going to come. See, I told you that the Bible wasn't, but it does every little detail. And the one boy has already died, and so by the time the battle is ready to be enjoined, there is only one brother. Antiochus III is the one who leads, and not Seleucus III. That's what happens here. And so it says, and shall overflow and pass through. Now, when you think of something overflowing, what do you think of? I always think of like New Orleans when a dike breaks, or when a dam breaks. I mean, the water is released, overflows. And when it pours out, does it trickle? No. Once it gets started, it gains momentum. And you've probably seen the pictures of what happens when a river or a stream is flooded, and it just starts tearing up trees, moving houses, floating cars. You say, walk out there and try and pick up a car in the parking lot. Well, no way, you're liable to hurt yourself, right? Yet in a flood, you see cars being carried away. That's the power that he's trying to represent here. He attacked like a flood that swept through. And it says he passed through, and then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. In other words, he recovered almost all of the land that his dad had lost. It says he passed through even unto his fortress. What fortress? The borders of the kingdom that were before when his dad lost it all to the Ptolemies when Egypt attacked. You say, well, good for him. Now we're back to the same Syria and Egypt thing. That's right. But how do you suppose Egypt reacts to it? Because that's what happens in verse 11 and 12. And the king of the south, Ptolemy, shall be moved with choler. Now, we studied that word once before, right? I mean, that means he's really upset. He is really upset. And what happens here is, as they are recovering all the land that Syria lost before, they keep getting closer and closer and closer down to Egypt itself. And as they approach the borders of Egypt itself, Ptolemy's like, all right, enough's enough. I'm sick and tired of these little battles. I'm tired of this nonsense. So he takes the whole army out and decides, no, I'm mad now. You stirred a possum. And it says he shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. The fight at Raphia, and what happens is the Syrians decide, this is our chance. We're finally going to put down Egypt, and we're going to be done with this nonsense. And the Bible says, the king of the north puts forth a great multitude, and he does. It's really impressive when you read the statistics of the armies here that are engaged in this battle. But remember, God's always in control. And so you have Antiochus III, who calls himself Antiochus the Great. And he has decided, you know what? I'm going to be bigger and badder than Dad and Grandpa. I am going down to Egypt, and I'm going to win this thing. So he takes all his folks down there, concentrates all his forces, only he loses. He lost his entire army. In fact, history tells us that almost was captured, which probably would have put the Syrian Empire to rest, except he fled through the desert and went home. Now, this is really interesting, because look at verse 12. And when he hath taken away the multitude, talking about Ptolemy down in Egypt, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s. He whooped the whole Syrian army. But God's word says he shall not be strengthened by it. You know what? He was too proud and too lazy to follow after him. We've seen this in other battles in history. In fact, it happened a couple of times in the Civil War. Gettysburg was one of those times. The battle was so intense that the Southern Army was completely whooped and wasted, and they retreated back across to safety. But the North was like, we lost a lot of people, we ought to. And because they hesitated, look how long the battle went on again. It happened in Germany. It happened in France. It happened with the Soviets. There are times when you got one army on the ropes and everybody's like, if we just pursue after them. Happened several times in the nation of Israel. No, let's just stop. It's been a long day. And if they had pursued after them, they probably could have wiped them out and changed history. Tell me God isn't at work in this king. Ptolemy thinks he is such a big shot, Ptolemy the fourth here, but he's so lazy that he doesn't pursue and conquer the Syrians. But look at verse 8, for the king of the north shall return. Are you kidding me? No. What happens, he has had a chance to kill Antiochus the Great. And he doesn't. He slips through the desert. He gets back home. It takes him several years to regroup and to raise the money and to raise the folks to come. But he gets a new army in verse 13, and it says, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. So the Syrian response, he goes home, he gets ready again, he's really mad now, and what he's going to do is instead of just marching down into Egypt big and bold, he's going to work his way down into Egypt. And it says, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in that times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. See, what happens is he works his way over towards the nation of Israel. And as he is beating these outposts of Egypt, and as he's having these small wars, he pushes over to the nation of Israel and he decides, well, wait a second, I could pick up the nation of Israel. It's a fertile land. Remember, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Ptolemy has been ruling there for a long time. And Israel doesn't like the fact that Egypt is requiring taxes of them. So when they see Antiochus the Great coming, they're like, aha, this is our chance to throw off these Egyptians. But what they don't realize is they welcome in Antiochus the Great, and they're setting the scene for Antiochus Epiphanes to really, really hate him. The other thing that they don't realize is while Antiochus the Great is trying to conquer the nation of Israel, he says, with many troops and with great riches. Now listen, when you take a massive army, you have to take care of them, right? Where'd they get the riches? Do you think they hauled them from Syria? No. They did what every army does, right? As they were rolling through, they took what they needed. And so here's the nation of Israel thinking they're going to deliver us from Egypt. But now you have war raging up and down through Israel, and you have Ptolemy trying to fight to get back the nation of Israel. And you have Antiochus fighting for control of the nation of Israel. And so the Egyptian army sucking the nation of Israel dry, and the Syrian army sucking the nation of Israel dry. And what's Israel get out of it? I'll tell you what, whoever wins is going to want taxes, right? So they really haven't changed their position much. They are whooping on them, but Israel decides they're going to join. A couple of other guys decide that they are going to join. And so we have this unique situation here where it says, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. You have all these smaller kingdoms that are aligning themselves with Antiochus against Ptolemy, and they're trying to whoop him. Enter this interesting phrase in verse 14. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. All of these robbers, these armies that controlled Israel and collected tributes, it says they stole food and supplies, and they tried to establish the vision. What vision? This is referring back to Daniel chapter 8, the vision of the Jewish suffering under Antiochus Epiphanes. They tried to establish Assyrian control, but it says they will fall. They decide to go down and attack Egypt proper after they've taken a lot of these outposts. And again, you see, God is stirring in their region, and you're bringing these forces who were just fighting each other, and now their attention is starting to focus on the nation of Israel. And God's going to use that here in a little bit to bring about some resentment from Antiochus Epiphanes. Look at verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities. And that's what he did. He attacked strongholds in Syria and Samaria. In fact, some of them he has to lay to them. You have these great walled cities, and Ptolemy thinks, he is secure. He builds earthworks. He literally hauls in ground. He can't get through the wall, so he brings in ground and keeps piling it against the wall until he builds a ramp to get up and into the city. That's dedication. There's a lot of work going on here. You're talking about a kind of siege most of the world doesn't know about yet. Egypt is defeated. In verse 16, Israel is defeated. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land. Now we're talking about Antiochus the Great, which by his hand shall be what? Consumed. See, they really wanted Antiochus to come in and throw off the rule of Ptolemy, but were they supposed to make leagues with other nations? Does not the Bible forbid that? Wasn't God supposed to be the one who fought for them? And so unwittingly, not following his word, they made a league with Antiochus, and when Antiochus comes in, by the time the wars have raged through the nation of Israel, he's taking the riches of the nation of Israel to feed the armies that are attacking Egypt. didn't always get what you want. Folks, be careful what you ask for. Be really careful what you ask for. The long and the short of it here in verse 16 is there are 36 years of victories, but he cannot totally defeat Egypt. Now we see role reversal, right? When we started the day, Egypt had conquered Syria, but they can't quite totally put them down. And now you have role reversal with Antiochus the Great, and he's going down, and he's winning battles here and there, and he's took over Israel, and he's getting more money, and he's getting more support. He marches down in Egypt, but it's right there. It's right there on the edge of victory. But he just can't seem to win. So he decides he's going to try something a little different. These guys have been fighting for 150 years. Look at verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. That's the league of Israel and these others, and the whole Syrian army, and he wants to march in and put a whooping on them. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women. He comes up with an idea. If I can't have total victory over Egypt by war, then let me go back to something that has worked down through the ages. And he gives his daughter, Cleopatra, to the new king, because Ptolemy IV has now passed from the scene, and Ptolemy V is on the throne. He is a very young man, and he hasn't been on the throne very long. So Antiochus the Great comes up with this wonderful idea. He's not an older guy. He doesn't know what's been happening. He's a young man, probably doesn't have a lot of wisdom. I tell you what, I have this beautiful daughter, Cleopatra. I will go down to him. I will give Cleopatra to him. She can be his wife, and she will stand by me. And he rode at this guy until eventually I get to take over all of Egypt. Sounds like a great plan. Seems like it ought to work. Only who's in control? Antiochus or God? That's exactly right. Look at the verse here. And he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, in other words, gets to be his wife, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. Very interesting thing happens here in history, because Cleopatra has grown up Assyrian. Her dad, Antiochus the Great, has been waging all this war, but she gets down to Egypt, and she loves the land, and she loves her husband. And Cleopatra, this Cleopatra, actually becomes the Cleopatra of history that makes the name famous. The exact opposite of what Daddy wanted. Daddy thought she'll be a trip up for this guy. She'll be a snare to him. And eventually she'll bring down Egypt. And instead she goes down there, joins right in with their worship, fits right into their politics, and actually becomes a very, very powerful political figure in the land of Egypt. So instead of standing with Daddy, now Daddy actually has to fight against her if he wants to get anywhere in the land of Egypt. It didn't exactly work out the way he wanted it to. Well, he's upset. If I'm going to have a big kingdom and I'm going to be better than Dad and Granddad, and I can't get Egypt, then I have to go somewhere else. And again, God is setting the scenes for some important things to happen in history. Look at verse 18 and 19. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. What do you mean the isles? This is his coastal campaign. He turns toward Greece and decides, you know what? Alexander the Great owned everything from Greece all the way this way. So can I. I might not own Egypt, but I can own all the little islands, and I can own Greece. So he starts his campaign that way. And he conquers many of them. He is successful for a while. But he has a problem. And the problem isn't the Greeks. The problem is this little upstart Roman general named Lucius Scipio. Look at what God says here in verse 18. but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. See, Scipio is upset because Rome is starting to enter the picture. And Rome sends an emissary to the Syrians and says, listen, we're going to start doing things the Roman way. The problem is, Antiochus the Great doesn't take him seriously and says, who is Rome to me? And kind of puts him off. So Scipio is like, really? You're not even going to take my emissary very seriously? So as he attacks through the Isles and he draws close to where Scipio is, Scipio decides, I'll show you why you should have taken us seriously. And puts a whooping. I mean, he puts a whooping on Antiochus the Great. At Thermopylae, does that sound familiar? I mean, soundly defeats the army. They go down towards Magnesia, and he has his navy, and they're going through the islands, and they come together again at Magnesia, and the battle is so bad that he has to surrender his navy. The terms of surrender, you will pay tribute for 12 years. It's going to cost you X amount of sum of money right now, and I'm taking 24 prisoners, and one of them is your youngest son, Epiphanes. Remember that name. It's going to become important next week. But what happens here is God uses Scipio to keep Asiatic control from Europe. And because Asiatic control is kept out of Europe, that literally paves the way for what history is going to know as the Holy Roman Empire. If Scipio doesn't stop Antiochus the Great here, then you have Asia taking over that part of the world instead of the Romans. And if the Romans don't take over that part of the world, you don't have the great Roman Empire, which sets a perfect scene for the birth of his son, Jesus Christ, and the spread of the gospel everywhere. So while all these guys are battling and they think they're all in charge and they think they're doing their thing, you can see how God is at work here in the affairs of men, and he is working out what needs to be done. End of verse 18. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. He suffers these huge defeats. He's lost his army. He has lost just about everything. So what he does is he makes his eldest son co-regent, and he goes in search of money so that he can raise a new army, kind of like what he did with his campaign against Egypt, right? He lost down in Egypt. He escaped through the desert. Took him a couple of years. He raised some money, raised a new army, comes back. He's thinking the same thing's going to happen with Rome. This little Scipio might have got me now, but I'm going to put my son in charge, and I'm secretly going to go, and I'm going to start finding money, and I'm going to start finding men. I'll come back and teach Scipio a thing or two. So what he does in verse 19, it says, then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land. In other words, he has to retreat and head for Syria. But he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Here's the problem. While he is on his way back home, he has put his eldest son in charge. He tries to rob a temple in the east. The temple guards don't really care who he is. They just don't want him stealing the gold, so they kill him. It's almost as if he disappears from history, and for a while everybody wonders what happens to him. He makes his son co-regent, and then he sneaks off to kind of underhandedly, under the radar, get this money. But while he does, God humbles him and says, you've done what I've needed you to do. And these lowly temple guards kill him. He doesn't die in some big fancy battle. He doesn't die at the angry hands of some of his own citizens. He dies in a very unique way. It says he stumbles and falls, and God has an interesting way of saying he dies. He's not found. They bury him without the pomp and circumstance due a king, and he's simply not found. What an incredible, humbling way for somebody who called himself Antiochus what? The Great? we come to verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. This is Seleucus IV, calls him Philopator. He is paying heavy tribute to Rome. That was part of the deal when Daddy lost the battle. And so he inherits this heavy tax. Well, how do I get this tax? By taxing everyone under my control. That's the only answer that he has. So his son, Philopator here, is known as a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. So everyone that he still controls in the Syrian Empire, by the way, that includes Heliodorus, that he trusts. And he sends him to the nation of Israel to collect taxes. But look at the end of verse 20. It says, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. He just dies. And most folks in history believe he was poisoned. And most folks believe he was poisoned by this Heliodorus. He sends him to Israel to collect the taxes. Before he goes, he poisons the boss man. And he dies while he's gone, so couldn't have been him, right? And when he comes back from collecting the taxes in Israel, he's going to try to put his bid in to take over the throne of Syria. But there's other folks who are standing there, and there's one guy who doesn't even deserve to be on the throne who is actually going to rise to power. So you see what God did is he took this great Syrian army, he stirred up the Romans, defeated them. Antiochus the Great passes off the scene. The one that he put in charge is only king for a very short time. He realizes he has to raise this money to give to Rome. He sends someone he thought was trusted to Israel to collect the taxes. The guy actually poisoned him, and you have the Syrian Empire without a leader. They've just been whooped. They owe all this money to Rome, and Ptolemy's sitting down there in Egypt kind of wondering, yeah, maybe now's the time. Maybe now's the time. Because there doesn't even seem to be a true successor now in Syria. The tax collector is gone. They're in heavy debt, and there doesn't seem to be anyone. Leaves a hole in government that is ripe for the rise of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Hated the Jews. Strong. Verse 21 next week. Amazing. Amazing how God works through these men. Egypt has a chance to control all of it, and yet a lazy person won't finish the job. Antiochus the Great, who seems to be like he's just going to, and yet well-known Rome in general comes to great prominence by defeating Antiochus the Great, who sneaks off and tries to do some underhanded stuff. God ends up killing him insignificantly. His son realizes he has to pay the taxes, gets poisoned, and now who is in charge of this great Syrian empire? And who's in charge? What is Egypt going to do in their response? Who is going to rise to power when power doesn't exist? And you're going to see that God brings, which is very interesting all on its own, God is going to bring Antiochus Epiphanes to power. And he hates the Jews. Who's in control? God's in control. Always. Whether we like it or not, whether things seem to be going our way or not. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, thank you that you are always concerned in the affairs of men. And I know in my own life it seems like sometimes evil has just rose up and been in power and they get away with anything and everything. And you think, my goodness, what in the world is going on? And the answer is, your will is going on. We get what we deserve. Sometimes we get these harsh leaders and these cruel leaders and these sinful leaders because that's what we deserve. And judgment needs to be brought to turn us back to you. But amazingly enough, through all of this, the Jewish people were seeking one thing and actually got something quite different. They ended up paying an awful lot of taxes, more than they paid to Egypt. They ended up paving the ground for Antiochus Epiphanes to come in and judge them because of their sin. Give us an example of what the Antichrist is going to do in the end times. It's amazing how much hatred for you there can be in the world. And yet you still guide, direct, and work even through people who cannot stand your holy name. Help us to love you. Help us to share the gospel. Help us to take advantage of the time you've given us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.